Good morning, everyone. We still have a few people joining, so we're going to give them a minute to get settled, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're ready to go. We have quite a few participants, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Today's webinar, Technology Trends for Public Transit. Let me just make sure. Today's webinar is being presented by LILEE Systems in collaboration with Trapeze Group and via Metropolitan Transit. With this panel, we wish to provide some insight into 3 topics that are part of today's conversation from a vendor and also from an agency perspective. Before I introduce our 4 panelists, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues and friends if you would like to do so. The webinar is expected to end at about 12:15 or 12:20 Eastern Time. We also invite your comments and questions, so please look at the Q&A section on your screen. If you think of a question for the panelists at any point, just type it in there and I will hold it for the Q&A section at the end of today's webinar. So with that, today's panelists are, starting from LILEE Systems, Eric Bauer, Senior Sales Director. Good morning, Eric.
Hey, good morning, Paola. Good morning, everybody.
Edward Brandis, Business Development Manager. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
From via Metropolitan Transit, we have Steve Young, Vice President of Technology and Innovation. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
And from Trapeze Group, we have Jeff Moore, Vice President of Industry Solutions and Alliances. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
Our agenda for today will cover a panel session on industry trends, final remarks from each of our panelists, and a question and answer session at the end. But again, feel free to pose your questions during the webinar as you think of them. At this time, I would like to start with our panel discussion. The first trend for discussion is mobility as a service. The emergence of new mobility services in the last 10 years, such as Uber, Lyft, and even now electric bikes and scooters, have begun to reshape how people make transportation choices. We see terms like mobility as a service were born as mobility had now more choices to become more tailored to what travelers need. So now a person might consider multiple transportation modes to reach a destination faster or even cheaper. Talking about new mobility services, you may be familiar, a new study from University of Chicago was released in October 2018. It finds that ride-sharing services are more of a complement to public transportation than a substitute. They report that while its effects vary with the size of the city, introducing the service to an area increased ridership significantly over the following 2 years. Some say that services like Uber and Lyft are helping people give up their cars and increase their use of more sustainable options, such as public transit. Others have found that ride-sharing services contribute to congestion in major cities and reduce transit ridership. So which is it? I guess the answer is more likely it depends on the city, the state of public transit, or the cost of driving, among other factors, right? So with that, I would like to present my first question to Steve. What should agencies focus their energies in their short-term and long-term when introducing these services, Steve? Are ride-sharing services and competing or complementary service to VIA?
Thank you. This is a great question, and probably we could talk a really long time about this one. So I'll try to keep it brief because this covers a lot of areas. When we talk about mobility as a service, it can mean a lot of different things. Here in San Antonio, we're I think up to 14,000 permits for dockless vehicles. and we've kind of reached the tipping point where everyone's saying we need to step back and figure out as a city how we're going to, address issues that come along with this. But it makes it a really exciting time for all of us in the industry to kind of figure out where do we fit in, what role does a transit agency play. And so at VIA, we're really focusing on a number of things right now. We're certainly exploring potential partnerships, things like app integrations with mobility partners. We have active projects in that area. We recently released an RFP to a number of as a service providers. This would include like dockless vehicles, TNCs and the like. We put an RFP out to really find out how these players would be willing to work with us as a transit agency and really trying to fill in those first and last mile gaps. So, I think how every agency is going to interact with these entities might depend a little bit on the comfort level of working with these private sector partners. It might depend on what's going on in your particular city. San Antonio has been relatively open to date about working and inviting these companies into the city. So the other kind of half of this is what I think about, and I guess I should address the last part of the question as well, the complementary or competing, and I think the answer is yes. I think it's situational. I think it's dependent on the writer, and I think it can happen both ways. I know you referenced the one study. In that particular study, it was looked to be complementary in San Antonio, but there was a study I think that just was released yesterday, kind of saying that most of these services are cannibalizing transit ridership. So I think it's our role here to really figure out how we can work together to help our customers have a really valuable trip put together for them that allows them to get out of their vehicle. And I think that's what we're really focusing on, is how we can put together packages for our customers in San Antonio where someone doesn't want to use their car, they want to get out of their car and actually leverage transit plus some third party in some cases. And the other half of that, I think with mobility as a service, is really looking at potentially even looking at how you re-architect some of your bus service, but that's going down a whole nother path. But that's something we're also doing in San Antonio. We're actually, last night we awarded a bid to a vendor to actually replace bus service in one of the outlying areas of our city, kind of looking at, an area that's maybe underserved by transit. It's not efficient for traditional service. So those are the kind of things we're looking at with mobility as a service.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. And now I'm going to ask Jeff. Trapeze started a partnership with Lyft in October 2017 to enhance demand response service. Is this exclusive to paratransit services? Jeff, how are agencies responding to this collaboration? And what is a win-win result for Trapeze, Lyft, and the transit agency?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Our partnership with Lyft started in around APTA 2017. We did launch it as a full demand responsive integration. So it's integrated with our demand response platform. So it extends well beyond paratransit. So basically any demand responsive solution that a transit agency might be providing to the public, whether ADA or non-ADA, we're able to provide Lyft as an option, side by side with taxi and the dedicated fleet. That's the first piece. And then the second piece, is really around non-emergency medical transportation as well. So this really is, a platform, an integration to our platform that allows for agencies, regardless of what type of demand responsive solution they're offering, to provide Lyft as an option inside of that. And this was actually kind of our first foray into the mobility as a service world, as you think of it. So this is being used or can be used to support microtransit type of operations, and more broadly is forming the basis for a larger mobility as a service platform that we're starting to offer to customers. Today, we have a number of pilot projects in the works that include Lyft as an integration component, but also some other pilots that include other mobility options, TNCs, taxis, ride share, car share, bike share, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that we think is going to be a really critical component for transit agencies going forward. So we talk about win-win, right? We're trying to leverage and enable our partners as transit agencies to be able to provide all kinds of mobility options to their customers, to the riding public. And so this is kind of, that was the start of that adventure for us.
Perfect, thank you, Jeff. My next question is for Ed. The concept of mobility as a service becomes a reality to the individual traveler when a mobility as a service mobile app becomes available. And this must integrate mobility and public transit options along with user choice and payment. It also must seamlessly integrate various passenger information systems, real-time travel conditions, and user preferences. So from a technology point of view, Ed, how can mobility as a service be achieved, and what is needed to make a mobility as a service mobile app relevant, reliable, accurate, and deliver a really frictionless commute experience?
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, I would really welcome mobility as a service. As a frequent traveler, going to cities, it's often my personal preference not to rent a car. And I generally look for, travel options that are going to be, more convenient and easy to use. But, but today, right, that would require, I have to go to the public transit website or, do some other trip planning, on your own. So in terms of what does the app have to do, it has to do some of what you laid out earlier. You're going to need a portal that's going to do, an end-to-end trip plan, something door to door, and give you, the various options in terms of how long each journey will take, and at what cost, and apply your preferences about how much you're willing to pay and how long you're willing to walk. So, I think it would be, I would welcome, an app that I can just, pull up and say, okay, I'm gonna walk to the light rail station. I'm gonna hop on it. Then it makes most sense to, grab an Uber from there, and perhaps there's an Uber there waiting for me, and I can hop in it and then continue the rest of my journey. But and having had been a long background, in public transportation, I see perhaps one of the challenges, could be in trips that are planned, using transportation. And, what I've seen in the advancements in some of the intelligent transportation systems is that some of them now have the ability, although it's more of an internal function, to hold the bus, often referred to as transfer connection protection. So one of the ways that I think, the app or, ultimately this service would be helpful is that, if it could have that level, of interaction such that a request could be made to the public transit system, knowing that there is, a customer wanting to connect to the service, and if it falls within certain boundaries, that the transit authority would have the decision-making capability to hold that bus, maybe not a train, but certainly hold, a bus, so that that person can continue their journey. If not, it would be important to have that, bit of a closed-loop feedback to the rider that says, what, you're gonna miss your bus. Maybe your Uber is taking longer to get there. We're unable to hold it, but don't worry, the next bus will be there in 10 minutes, and look for that bus. That's those are some of the ways that I thought about, how could this be, more effective. And I was, being a user of public transit myself, I think, what, if that could be one piece where if I was planning trips and they were breaking down because I was missing the connections to the public transit systems, it would be helpful to have the app, be able to help out in a way to help me make those connections.
Perfect, thank you, Ed. So I want to move on to my next topic, which it's autonomous vehicles. So autonomous vehicles are also known as driverless or self-driving vehicles. They've been a topic of interest around the world for a couple of years now. Seems like cities and the public transport industry in North America are now committed to deploying pilot programs to test autonomous vehicles on public roads. As you can see, the Department of Transportation is planning to fund autonomous driving systems this year for up to $60 million, which is great. In the US, this year, cities like Vegas, Houston, San Jose, Tampa Bay, they all plan to deploy shared autonomous shuttles to connect downtown areas with dedicated fixed routes that are a few miles long, and also within university campuses. That's just another example of the commitment of the industry to deploying these autonomous driving systems. So my first question is for Eric. Eric, LILEE Systems has made public our work with autonomous vehicles in Taiwan. Together with other leading Taiwanese technology companies, LILEE and the Taichung City built a 9-meter self-driving bus, and it was featured in the city's Flora Expo, offering rides to visitors on a fixed dedicated route. What is LILEE's role in the autonomous vehicle space, and what are your plans or roadmap to keep deploying the driverless commuter bus in North America?
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Paula. So first, a little bit about Taichung. So Taichung City is Taiwan's second largest city. It just recently became the second city in Taiwan. It's on the west coast. It's had significant population growth just in the last 10 years. So their city government, about 10 years ago, really came around to this realization that they needed to do everything they could proactively to keep the standard of living where they wanted it to be in Taichung, but also being aware of their fiscal realities in terms of funding, operational realities in terms of a shortage of drivers. So it's a very similar situation to what we would see in public transportation in North America. They came to LILEE Systems asking us to lead up a consortium. So the role that we played there in Taichung City was really as sort of the autonomous vehicle technology lead. So as I mentioned, we put together a consortium of technology firms, of university groups that were working in the area, and then also working directly with the transit operators and local government. One of the important elements that drove our participation there was, as you mentioned, the realization that a public transportation authority virtually anywhere in the world is extremely limited in terms of capital dollars that they have to spend. And they've already made a significant investment in the vehicles and roadway in terms of BRT or light rail. So we wanted to deliver the benefits of autonomous or advanced driver assistance systems technology to a public transit agency, improvements like improved safety, improved fuel efficiency, improved vehicle operation, and associated life cycle improvement, but with a nod toward the fact that you already have a fleet of buses. So as you mentioned, we started with an existing 9-meter bus. We worked with the bus manufacturer and the major system tier 1 OEMs to create an autonomy kit, obviously sensor enabled, relying heavily on video input and LiDAR sensor input. And ultimately, we just wrapped up a 30-day trial period. During that 30-day period, these buses were running on public streets. They were providing real trips to real passengers, including wheelchair-bound passengers, including school children, over 5,000 riders. We collected survey information from those riders. First results have been very positive, but we're under a process now where we're formally reviewing all of the input and looking at what steps we can take next. So one of the things that has made what we've done in Taichung a little bit more achievable. I mean, I think the big picture of driverless cars, an overall network of driverless cars, you know, that's the problem that the Ubers and the Waymos and the Teslas are tackling. But when you focus it on public transit and fixed route operation, or even bus rapid transit type type operations, it becomes a much easier problem to manage. So what we're looking to do now, and we're already in conversations here in North America, trying to take this same approach that we've applied in Taiwan successfully and looking for new partners, new public agencies to work with on deploying real-world pilots here in the United States or Canada.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. I presented a few pictures of the self-driving bus in Taichung City. My next question is for Jeff. Jeff, Trapeze has partnered with other industry players to introduce autonomous vehicles for a couple of years now. In December 2017, became public that Trapeze launched the first autonomous vehicle in Switzerland that is fully integrated into local public transit. What are your public transit customers' requirements and timeline as far as deploying driverless technology? And what's Trapeze's strategy to capture market share in North America?
Yeah, so we, like you said, in Switzerland, we launched this, kind of initial AV pilot. For us, that was a research and development effort headed by our Swiss group. We have a campus out in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, which is where we're doing this. And we put together a consortium of, the local transit authority, the operator, government officials, and some other technology players. And we acquired an autonomous vehicle from Navia. So that's our vehicle, and we operate that, or I shouldn't say we operate that, but the transit operator in the area is operating that. Our view on this is it should be, whether it's driverless or not, it should be fully integrated into everything you're doing. So as a transit operator, right, you need to have access to and visibility to what's happening with the autonomous fleet, just like you do with the fleet that's being driven by humans. And so our view on this is you want to fully integrate that with the existing technology stack that you've got. And so, we've been working hard in Switzerland and bringing that over into North America now, right, to make sure that that integration is seamless, that you can see where these vehicles are. You can make adjustments to the operation, whether it's autonomous or not. And you can have, as we all believe is going to be the case in North America for quite some time, mixed fleets, and you can operate them together without standalone systems and so on and so forth. So that's really been our focus. In North America, we're talking to a number of transit agencies today, actually, around how they can launch autonomous fleets and how those fleets can be integrated into the operation that they have today. So we're advancing those. Some of those are pilots that are being driven by funding requirements. Some are just pilot projects that agencies are taking on their own. But that's really the idea. We want one system, one platform that the agency is using to manage the entirety of their fleet, autonomous and traditional.
That's great. Very interesting, Jeff. Thank you. Our next question is for Steve. Steve, the city of San Antonio is making advances in the autonomous vehicle arena as well, and will release a request for proposal for testing autonomous vehicles in 3 locations this year. This project is part of what's called Smart Mobility Texas, a coalition of public and private groups focused on bringing smart technology to Texas. When a city starts its path to becoming a smart city and plans the testing of autonomous vehicle technology, what elements are considered to determine if the project will have a positive return for the agency, the community, and the city? And what does success look like after testing on these initial 3 locations, and what is VIA's roadmap following this initial project? And finally, what are big opportunities and hurdles in deploying this program in your experience?
Thank you. There's a lot going on there.
I know.
And so, yeah, in San Antonio, we have a coalition of local municipal agencies called Smart SA or Smart San Antonio. And we've identified 3 innovation zones in the city of San Antonio, each with kind of very unique problems and use cases for a number of things, and transportation included. And so we haven't decided if autonomous will happen necessarily at any of those 3, but it's certainly been under discussion, and certainly one of the things that may be proposed when we put our RFP out there. The kind of things we really feel like an early adoption of autonomous in these areas, we really feel like they need to come there to solve a problem, right? Not just to necessarily be a showcase. I mean, we certainly want to work on public perception of autonomous, and there's a value to putting a pilot out just to you know, get the public comfortable with that idea, and that's going to need to happen probably in every case. But we really want to solve some of the unique problems of these three zones, and I'm not going to delve into the particular problems each of those zones. Some of them are, you know, like our medical center, we have very large campuses, and sometimes it's very difficult for people to move between place to place. Kind of think, you know, a la Las Vegas, where the casino properties are giant. So those are the kind of things we're looking at in our innovation zones. You know, the success for us is going to look any number of ways. Did we solve the problem that we're trying to address? Did the public accept what, you know, we put out there? How was their feedback? And I think safety has to be considered in all of these pilots and programs, right? Because one of the things we're all saying is that when we deploy autonomous, it's going to be much safer than a human driver. So that's another thing we really want to be cognizant of as we you know, start looking at these programs and put this out there. You know, there's a lot of, I would say, hurdles, and some of them were already addressed, I think, by Jeff and others in their answers. Funding's a hurdle for these, right? It's a new technology, and so it's not necessarily an inexpensive mass market technology today. And there's different models for autonomous, right? So there's more of a as a service or subscription or lease type option. So funding's an issue, and you know, in our particular case, we have a coalition of partners, so that's a challenge too, right? Anytime you get a large group of different players working together, there's some hurdles that need to be solved. But I think it's a very unique opportunity to, you know, let agencies and cities be innovative, to show their customers that you're looking at new significant options for helping them, you know, move about a city and connect their jobs and their homes.
Perfect. Well, we'll look forward to the results, Steve, for this coming year. We're going to move on now to our next topic. We have discussed mobility as a service and autonomous vehicles as two topics that will continue to be very relevant in 2019 as cities continue their path to modernization and digitization. Both mobility as a service and autonomous vehicles are dependent on reliable and secure onboard technology, a robust connection, and seamless integration with third-party applications. Some of the technologies that are required by mobility as a service and autonomous vehicles essentially can help improve safety and security. We now see more cameras on buses and trains with the latest technology in video analytics for facial or even object recognition, or safety systems that alert of driving distraction or driving unsafe practices. These systems become more accessible as cheaper and more reliable wireless communication allow for real-time, over-the-air access to the data that is being generated by these systems in a more efficient, secure, and cost-effective way. So back to you, Steve. How is VIAS benefiting from having real-time onboard data? Is onboard technology playing a significant role in the agency's efforts to increase ridership in the last year?
Thank you. We've been doing real time with Trapeze, in fact, for any number of years. Near real time is maybe a better way to say it. And I think as we move forward in the future, the focus is on how do we get the actual data transfer to be real time for as many systems as we need it for. And there's a lot of things driving the need for instantaneous communication. As you mentioned, security is a big one. We have a pilot right now to do real-time look into bus vehicles. We're looking at expanding that. Everyone's putting more and more out there around safety and security. So we're certainly doing a lot in that regard. As we delve deeper into fare payment and next generation fare payment, I think real-time plays a huge role in that for most agencies, with the need to validate accounts and payment backends. Maybe different, like MasterCard and Visa, if you want to do a real-time tap to pay. And all these things are going to demand that transit agencies and providers have instantaneous real-time communication with very little lag. So it's very important for us. We know we need to figure out better solutions for the future, and we're certainly looking at those as we speak today. All those things we feel like are going to have to help us drive ridership, right? If we don't offer these solutions and we're not offering innovative, easy to pay, well-integrated apps and payment methodologies, people aren't going to choose transit. So it's a high priority for us, and I'm pretty sure for most other agencies.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to move on a little bit more on the technology side. I have a question for Eric. Eric, 5G is the next generation of mobile networks. Is 5G mandatory? How is 5G changing the game for the adoption of driverless technology and the overall growing need for real-time onboard data for different systems such as vehicle location, CCTV, fare collection, remote condition monitoring, any other radio technology that has potential to compete against 5G?
Yeah, well, Paul, I think Steve just said it right there. Is, you know, he's been doing remote data collection, you know, for years already. So I'd say, you know, 5G is certainly not mandatory right now, whether it's for enabling edge-related intelligence, whether it's for collecting data in real time or near real time, even for some of the things that Steve mentioned, like live look-ins for video. You know, the existing 4G LTE, especially when you pair that with a stationary Wi-Fi transfer point at yards and depots, is doing the job. There's no doubt that 5G is going to transform a lot of things in society. And I have no doubt too that as 5G becomes ubiquitous, we will create new uses for it. New use cases will sort of appear once we really get our hands around and once the networks are established. But I wouldn't necessarily think it's a requirement right now for either autonomous or driver assist systems or real-time data transfer. The one caveat I would say is, look, about 10 years ago, I was dealing with getting data remotely off of mobile assets. And at the time, the only way to do it was through satellite, which at the time was extremely expensive. So we built, not we, LILEE, but the group that I was with at the time, built a solution that was extremely limited in terms of the data that it took off, because almost every byte that we took had a cost associated with it. And it sort of tied our hands so that when data transfer became cheaper, we had a major re-engineering task to do. So the one thing I would say is that 5G is going to come. It's not going to be here for another, say, 2-3 years in any meaningful way to the continent as a whole. But keeping an eye toward a future where data is going to be available at a much faster speed at lower latency is definitely something that we all need to do.
Great. All right. My last question is for Ed. Ed, please describe vendor equipment trends to support real-time onboard data. Are these becoming smaller, more powerful, and easy to use and maintain? What key technologies are available today that can help the public transits gather real-time onboard data from their fleets while keeping costs controlled and riders safe?
Thank you, Paula. There is a trend that we're observing, and it's not, the trend is that we're seeing a lot of transportation providers that are interested in maybe onboard technology that they can have a little bit more control over. By that I mean that they are looking at technology as an investment in much in the way they might their own IT in their offices. That they're buying a computing platform for their vehicle, and they're looking to use that to install the applications that they want, the way they want, and configure it they want, and kind of build, and if you will, a best of breed solution. We're seeing, the using technology that's been around, edge computing, smart gateways, that transportation providers are able to, create a system specifically for their business needs, and kind of pick the best players available in the market to do that. So that could be, integrating, attaching a badge scanner to that device. It could mean, loading software on there and plugging some cameras into it to do facial recognition or parcel left behind type recognition, and not having to buy, separate, unique, large investments in individual technologies, but rather looking at this as a platform that they can integrate in third-party apps that they choose, or potentially even develop their own apps and run it side by side. And I see that as kind of being the cost control mechanism, that when you have the flexibility to choose multiple technologies and you don't have to be beholden to any one particular supplier, that you have a great deal of flexibility to buy things more affordably and on the scale that's best for you, the transportation provider. As far as the safety goes, I think that's really one of the real emerging trends that we're seeing, is that there's a lot of new technology coming out for security, and it is behavioral recognition, facial recognition, parcel left behind technology, or something used to be here and it's no longer there anymore. And those are technologies that can be very easily implemented and integrated in this type of IoT edge computing environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And my last question on this topic is for Jeff. Jeff, Trapeze offers a multitude of public transit solutions, including products that deliver scheduled and real-time information to transit passengers. How is Onboard real-time data helping the public transits understand, connect, and serve the ridership better? What are some of the solutions in your portfolio that benefit from having a reliable, secure connection to the cloud or back office for real-time information?
Thank you, Paula. I think, maybe I'll start this part of the conversation by talking about a study that we did a few years back. So I think 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, we actually went out and talked to general public, right, riders, users of transit systems, and asked them, about what they wanted to see with respect to information. So how do they want to interact with the transit system, transit agency, to just go through their daily life? And I think one of the key things that came out of that was really, riders said it's really all about real-time information. So they're very tolerant, to our surprise, very tolerant to disruptions, to delays, to changes in the service. They just want to know what that is, right? So what we've been doing over the last few years is really focusing on, building out better solutions that really help to inform the general public, the rider, on what's going on inside of the transit system. Steve talked a little bit about some of the things we've been doing, for many years in VIA. Obviously, it all starts with having real-time communication with the vehicles, right? Knowing where those vehicles are, the status of those vehicles with respect to the service that they're providing, and how the operation is unfolding out on the street or out on the rails. And so it started there, back in the days of TDMA communications, and now with the higher bandwidth availability, right, of newer wireless public radio technologies, 4G LTE, and next 5G, we're able to leverage a lot more data points. So we're starting to integrate things like, capacity of the vehicles and loads against those capacities, so that riders know, is there even space for me on the vehicle that's coming down, or should I wait for the next one, or should I find another alternative? Steve talked a little bit about payment and fare collection. So obviously all of that infrastructure, as we're doing, real-time payments and validation, requires that connection. Prediction on vehicle breakdowns is critical for us these days. So we've got a solution there, right, that relies on that connection to the cloud to make predictions of when a vehicle may fail in service, so that you can avoid an in-service failure. So all of those types of things, including traditional communications with your vehicle fleet, with your drivers, with your operators, and then of course pulling all that data to make it available to the riding public is critical. And I think all of that, as Steve mentioned earlier, really drives improved ridership, right? So I think the public has spoken and said they need this information to make their commute, their ride, their journey reliable, and so that they know they're going to get to their destination on time, or at least they know when they're going to get there. And they're not going to take transit if that's not reliable. And so being able to provide this data in a consistent way, in a speedy way, so near real-time way, is critical to ensuring that ridership continues to grow.
Thank you, Jeff. That's very interesting. I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, please enter the questions in the Q&A section. We are going to try to get to them after our final comments from each of the speakers. And if not, these questions will be available at the end of the webinar for everybody to look at. So now I will ask our panelists to give us a final message. What's their insight or final remarks on technology trends for public transit. And then we'll start our Q&A section. So with that, let's start with Eric, please. Eric.
Sure. So, yeah, I think just continuing on the concept of a connected autonomous vehicle, I think the message that we're hearing is that the technology is already there, and transit agencies, operators are already making use of it. These next steps forward in terms of how can we better utilize the intelligence that's already on board our mobile assets, how can we better connect it to the back office, and how can we optimize everything to improve the operation, passenger approval, but also just the bottom line, make the vehicles run more efficiently. These are the questions that we're being able to get into now, and it's really exciting time to be working with the transit world on that.
It is exciting, Eric. Thank you so much. I will go ahead with Ed, please. Ed.
Sure. I've long always felt that in an organization, in a technology company, our best ideas always came from our customers. Very rarely did we have our own idea that it got off the ground. It was a wild success. So, and I hope that the inverse of that is true, that perhaps our customers' best solutions were ones that were born out of a creative process with their technology partners. So yes, my final remark is, as Eric had mentioned, these technologies are infinitely capable. And I think when you can, when you have a technology partner that you can develop a relationship with and actually begin discussing, your business challenges or your business goals, that very often you'll come to some, very creative, very capable solutions, and you're probably not the only one that is interested in those.
Thank you, Ed. Now, Jeff, will you please give us your final comments?
Yeah, thanks, Paola. So, Trapeze, right? We think of technology and systems to help manage transit operations. We think of that as an ecosystem, or as an overall technology platform. So today, right, we talked about kind of three areas that fall within the Trapeze ecosystem. One being our integration with Lyft, and that kind of hits that demand response area that you're seeing on the screen. We talked at length about autonomous vehicles and how to manage those, and that falls in that middle section around intelligent transportation system. And then finally, we closed by talking about real-time data, and I spent a little bit of time talking about how traveler information tools really need to leverage all of that data to be able to present that to the public. For us, that's a good chunk, right, of what we think a total platform should look like. So we coined this term, transit operations and planning systems. What our customers are telling us, or also called TOPS, what our customers are telling us is that they really need systems that look at the entirety of their operation, or at least integrate tightly so that their operation can run smoothly day in and day out. And so that's what we focus a lot on at Trapeze, right, is really trying to bring all these different components of the operation together to give, one, a high level view to the executives, but also to allow people in the business, in the operation, to better manage, to have better information to manage those systems. And so, critical for all of that, like we talked about, is really that real-time communications with vehicles. And so that's why we put ITS kind of in the center of this view, because a lot of those systems rely on that data. And so I think, as a transit agency or as an operator of transit or transportation services, if there's one thing I want you to take away, it's really, I think you want to look at that entire operation. You want to see, what are all those different integration points? Typically today, they're probably happening through phone calls from one person in part of the operation to another. And how can you maybe start to replace those or augment those with integrations from one technology piece to another? So think about your operation as an all-up TOPS system, and how you can better leverage technology to make sure that you're providing the best service that you can possibly provide.
Thank you, Jeff. And finally, we're gonna have Steve. Please, Steve.
Great. Well, there's been a lot of really good things said here, and at VIA, I think the one thing we can't do as agencies, whether it be at VIA or others, is to sit and do nothing, right? There's a lot of change going on, as we've talked about today, with mobility as a service, with autonomous vehicles, with communications. And so those are the kind of things we're really focusing on in our efforts moving forward. And I think it's a really exciting time for all of us as transit agencies and providers to work together to figure out solutions to provide all of this to provide better services for our customers.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. We have some questions that have been submitted by the audience. We will get through as many questions as time allows. We do have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to get started, and I'm going to go in order. So the first question is for Steve. Has VIA provided any customer education in regard to the autonomous vehicle pilot projects? If so, what was done?
Given the stage we're at, we haven't yet, because this is, like I said, this is a multi-agency cooperation, and we're only at the investigative stage right now. So it's a little bit too early to really focus on education around the vehicles. All of the outreach right now has been coordinated by the city of San Antonio, has been really just focusing on the innovation zones and really trying to figure out what are the challenges people are facing there, and what do they want to see to solve those challenges. So we're really at an earlier stage than actually where we'd want to be educating about the vehicles themselves. But when a city or agency gets to that point, obviously I think you can't just put a vehicle on the street and hope for the best. There's going to have to be a very large outreach effort, education effort around them, why it's being done, what are the benefits to the customers, etc.
Thank you. I have a question here. What is the biggest issue working with multiple private companies? So I would like if Eric, you give us your point of view, and then maybe Jeff, give us a point of view, please. So the question again is, what is the biggest issue working with multiple private companies?
I'll give my take on that. I actually like to hear Steve's take on it too, from the transit operator perspective.
Sure.
I mean, I think the biggest issue from, as one of the companies, one of the issues is always just transparency and communication, making sure that everybody's coming to the table, that everybody's clear about what they're bringing, what their role is, what their vision is, and then throughout the project, everybody working together, collaborating as a team with a single purpose.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Eric. I think, one of the major, issues that we often have is competing goals or objectives, right, among different private entities. So it's always tricky to try to work out. I think maybe Steve can add from a TA perspective, but one of the things we tried to do with the TNC space, right, is why we announced this integration with and partnership with Lyft, is we want to take some of the burden or guesswork and contracting work off of the transit agencies with respect to how to integrate, TNCs into the overall transit technology landscape. And so, we're trying to do those negotiations on behalf of our partners in transit, so they don't have to do that work. So we're trying to create kind of this common framework, contracting framework, that allows the agency to easily contract with us, and knowing that we've taken care of these relationships with some of these partners. So we've done it with Lyft. We're doing it actively right now with other TNCs, so that you've got like this portfolio of TNC options that you'll be able to choose from, all worked out from a data sharing, privacy, contractual perspective, so you don't have to worry about that.
And this is Steve. I'll chime in real quick because I really like what Jeff said. I think one of the things I was going to mention, I think one of the biggest hurdles with, working with public agencies can be some of the procurements around these projects, especially around these innovative kind of projects that are new. I really think what Jeff is speaking about with their, working out a lot of the contractual details and data sharing details really is a great methodology to helping agencies move a little faster in some of these projects. So actually, I think that's a pretty nice, innovative approach that really can help out transit agencies.
Thank you very much, everyone. I have another question. To truly achieve mobility as a service, we likely need integrated trip planning and fare payment. What are your thoughts on creating a Netflix-like model where all transport is billed at once? So, Steve, you can give us your point of view, and then maybe Jeff, you can give us your point of view.
All right. I think it's awesome. I think, the idea of paying a fixed amount per month that is going to conveniently, safely, and quickly move me around a city is great. And if that subscription can carry over just like Netflix and I can use it in a different city, even better. There are companies working on this. The challenge around fare payment is that there's no golden solution to it ultimately, right? Every agency or fare provider like Trapeze is going to have to negotiate contracts and payment methodologies with every partner. There's just not one standard that's going to work for all. So there's lots of data integrations and fare payment integrations. But ultimately, if that can be packaged together, there's companies working on this like WIM. If they can be packaged together and maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 options for a city that I can choose. That maybe it bundles transit, TNC, some kind of dockless vehicles, or car share. That would be really fantastic.
Yeah, I think Steve nailed it right on the head there. So, I think this is where we're going from a Trapeze perspective. We're definitely trying to get there. I think probably an interim step is going to be, kind of being a clearinghouse for all the different transportation options in Mass. So you're probably still going to pay, at least initially, the same fee you would have paid if you were using each of the individual services apps, directly. But it'll all be cleared for you, in a transit branded app that might be maintained either by the city or by the transit authority in the area, depending on how they want to structure it. And then eventually, because I think the hard part is really around the idea of rev share, right? So if you got a subscription fee that's being paid, how do you split that revenue between all the different transportation options or mobility options in the area? So I think we'll get there eventually. But right now, I think the interim step will be, creating a platform that allows you to at least pay once through a single mechanism for all the different transportation or mobility options you're using in an area.
Thank you. Jeff, I have a quick question. It says that you mentioned a survey about what riders want and how they want to interact with transit. Is that the survey available for public viewing?
Yeah, it's not available for the public, but reach out to us after the webinar is over and we'll be happy to package that and share it with you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeff. There is a question for Steve. Steve, do you collaborate with other agencies in Texas to share experiences, learn lessons, plans and benefits? Do you also discuss technology with them when defining your requirements?
The quick answer is yes. We talk to agencies in Texas and we talk to agencies across the US. So a lot of us talk routinely and candidly about our experiences, problems and solutions.
Perfect, thank you, Steve. So we're getting close to the time where we need to finish the webinar. So for the audience, all the questions are going to be available later, even those that were not answered live. We're going to make sure that we provide answers to those questions. Just 1 second. Please visit our websites to learn more about LILEE Systems, Trapeze Group, and via Metropolitan Transits, or please feel free to email our speakers. The information is going to be available on the slide deck after the webinar. Thank you everyone who joined us for today's webinar. Eric, Ed, Steve, and Jeff, thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. Your time is really valuable. I appreciate that. And thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day. We're gonna disconnect now. Thank you.
Thanks.